watching Independent Chick, and I'm Dana Foster. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're talking about domestic violence, and it's an issue that I've gone through and I've experienced, and it's also an issue that I talk about within my seminars when I'm traveling around Canada. I share my story of domestic violence, and so for me to do this episode was important for me. Manitoba is the second largest place in Canada of domestic violence, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring in a few women to chat about this subject in an open and honest place. So we have Kim Wheeler, who's a media specialist, and we have Gabrielle Ogilvie, and we have Christy Anderson, and she's a graduate student in First Nation Studies. Gabrielle is a radio DJ and also a performer. So that, as I had said, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. My had been also physical, but mostly mental. I've been able to share my story and speak with women. What is your experience with domestic violence?
I'm not a survivor of domestic violence. I am a survivor of childhood abuse, however. And I knew that I was not going to bring that abuse from my childhood into my adult life. And so, you know, I have remained focused and strong, and yeah. So I have no domestic violence.
Yeah. Gabrielle?
My only experience with domestic violence comes through, you know, your general dealings every day in life, being at the store and seeing, you know, a woman with a black eye, and those kinds of experiences where you're sort of separated from it. You want to help. How can you help? How can you reach out to this person who's a complete stranger? Right?
Now, Christy, you are also a survivor of domestic violence. If somebody was watching today, what would you want to share with them about your experience? Somebody is watching you today.
Oh, well, you know what? It was a long, hard road to get the courage and to finally leave for the last time. I can't tell you how many times I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving you. And I think that women need to understand that it's not a cut and dry situation. When you get involved in a violent, emotionally and physically and traumatic relationship with somebody, they become like a drug to you. You become addicted to them. You also become addicted to trying to fix the situation until you actually separate from that person and that relationship. It's really difficult to see how dependent you are on the relationship and on trying to fix the relationship, and how much you blame yourself for what's happening in the relationship, because if we blame ourselves, then somehow we can fix what's wrong, right? And so it was 8 years for me. 8 years of back and forth and lots of mostly emotional, spiritual, physical, all kinds of abuse from the same man. And, you know, I lied to myself a lot, told myself, oh, but it's different with us, right? Like, you don't understand. When people would try to talk sense into me, you don't understand, it's different, I know him, right? And you don't realize when you're caught up in the relationship how sick it is, and how much you make excuses for the man's behavior.
All right. Now, what can we do to open up those lines of communication between women about domestic violence? Is there a solution?
I think, you know, for me, you really have to be able to know how to talk to a person, and when they give you an in, right? They start to open up. You have to keep that conversation going. I have a young friend who was just assaulted over the weekend, and you know, she came to me and she told me what was going on, and she goes, I'm thinking of going to the police and pressing charges. And I said, well, I think you should do that, and you know, it will help you to feel more empowered over what has taken place, and you're not going to sit back and just do nothing about it and say, okay, well, this happened, but you're taking steps to correct it, and you're learning something about yourself, that it's not okay that happened to you.
Is this something that you think about for your daughters?
Absolutely. And you know, I've raised my kids like from the time they were little to know that any form of abuse is not okay. And so now, as they're young adults, you know, I tell them and say to them, you know, like, if something ever happened to you with a partner, and my daughter is moving out to Vancouver next year, right, for school, I said, like, we have friends there. I can be there, like, within, you know, 8 to 10 hours probably, you know, depending on flights.
Yeah.
And you're never going to be alone.
Yeah.
And don't ever let anybody make you feel like you have no one, because you don't.
Yeah, that's what I went through, is that I felt alone, that nobody understood what I was going through, and I had to hide a lot because I was in a position that was more public, so I didn't want anybody to know, and so I was protecting myself. Only the people that were really close kind of knew what I was going through, but didn't quite know to what level it was at. But I remember that was going home was just the safety zone, and being able to, I picked up the phone after I pressed charges. He went to jail, and I was fearful because his friends were now texting me. And I remember going through that issue and just picking up the phone and just being like, I need to come home. And I was on the plane the very next morning and back home, because it's a safety place, right? And telling my mom too was always hard for me. Like, the first time I had to tell her about my drug addiction was just like breaking down. The second time being like, I'm now a victim of domestic violence. What am I going to do? What is happening with my life? But I think the biggest thing was being able to share the story with other women, that it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to walk away. Now, Gabrielle, we were talking a bit about how rural domestic violence is now higher within Canada?
From initial surveys, because there are a lot of issues in terms of reporting domestic violence, what they're finding now is that women within isolated communities actually suffer more from domestic violence than others do within larger urban centers, and it just has simply to do with the number of services that are available to women in larger urban centers that it blankets. So you have, you know, a certain, like, for example, clinic, which helps women, and then you also have Shalom Mission, which is you know, a safe place where someone can go. Whereas in my community of Portage la Prairie, we don't have all of those same resources. We have one central location, the Portage Family Abuse Prevention Center. And what Status of Women Canada has done now is they've started to research these grassroots projects, where we're starting to learn a little bit more about what the face of domestic violence is in our rural community of the Central Plains in Manitoba. And it's groundbreaking in terms of what they're learning right now. And it's thanks to Status of Women Canada, and thanks to that funding the research. And it's taking place as we speak, as we sit here.
Do you think domestic violence is an Aboriginal women's issue?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Well, it's well documented that Aboriginal women do face, 5 times more likely of facing any kind of violence. That's both from partners, and also we are extremely more vulnerable to violence from strangers than any other demographic. Whether it's an Aboriginal woman's issue, I mean, I think it's a societal issue. This is a cultural issue. We live in a culture which, you know, blames and shames women, and which vilifies women for standing up for their rights and standing up for themselves, and which is basically gives all the power to men without question.
I was telling a person that who was a friend of mine, and they had said, I'm going through this issue, and he replied, oh, you probably like the attention. And I remember just being like, just so defeated that, is this me? Am I doing something wrong? And putting the blame on me.
Exactly, right? We live in a culture that blames the victim, and often that would be the woman, right?
Do you think that the reason why women aren't chatting about it or talking about it enough, or it's widely known that there's a lot of problems with domestic violence, but do you think that women aren't talking about it because there's a level of trying to protect the abuser, or trying to shelter their family from shame?
Well, there's that aspect of protecting the abuser, but there's also the aspect of, it's very difficult to even get a court ruling. I think they say something like 1 out of 10 cases of domestic violence will actually end in a prosecution. So again, it's a systemic level of, blaming the victim and not allowing for real justice to be had. I mean, in my situation, the man who who attacked me. And yes, he did go to jail, but he was let out right away. And it was really ridiculous. He never ever had to spend any time for it, and he had given me a black eye and broke my phone, and it was all very obvious. And he didn't do any time for it. He got a little.
But hearing those stats, right, it probably scares a lot of women into not speaking up, and it shouldn't. You should still feel like you have the right to go to the law, and whether that's going to turn into charges or jail time for the abuser, they should still at least take those steps.
I remember feeling a lot of guilt when I had to put him in jail, and I didn't understand why I was feeling like that. Why am I feeling bad for this guy?
Taking care of his feelings, which we have a tendency to do a lot of times.
What would you want people to understand the most about domestic violence?
That there is hope, that it is a cycle and it's vicious, but you can break free, and that there's healing, because although it felt hopeless at times and like I was never going to get this man out of my heart, I can now say, although it was a very burdensome journey, I can now say that I do not love him anymore, and I do care for this person, and I hope he gets help. I really do hope he gets help, but I'm free, and there is hope. It's just a lot of hard work. You have to be very introspective, and we need to acknowledge where we have what we can do to change, right? Because we have to stop trying to change the person we're in that relationship with, and acknowledge what's keeping us there, and how can we start to change our own perspective to leave that relationship.
The other side of it is people that are coming from an outside view. What can they do? I mean, I've been walking down the street and I've seen a man push and start punching this woman, and all I could do was stand and stare at them. That's really all I could do. I was worried about getting myself in harm, and I just stood there and stood my ground, and I was like kind of shaking, but that's all I could do. How do you feel like you can approach these subjects as somebody who's looking outside?
Right. Well, I mean, I've had this happen before, and so I'm a radio show host, so I have many community figures that come in, and we had the executive director of the Portage Family Abuse Prevention Center on the show, and I asked her on the air, what can I do? And she slipped me her card and she said, this is the number you need to remember, this is our crisis line. And what you can do maybe the next time you're in a public situation and there's something that you're witnessing, or there's someone that you kind of know, an acquaintance, and you've kind of heard, and you kind of have an understanding, get them in a place where they feel safe, slip them the card and say, when you're ready, here's the number. Know the number, know where to find it online, just have it at the ready. And I know that's helped me a lot. At least feeling like I can do something instead of feeling powerless and going home and sitting there and thinking, what am I going to do? What can I do?
Kim, to daughters that are listening.
I've done the same thing. I've stared a guy down on the streets of Vancouver and said, like, this isn't okay. You can't be out here hitting this woman. And they were strangers. I've talked to my friends and said, you know what, violence is never the answer, abuse is never the answer, and you're a good person, you're a kind person, you deserve to be loved and respected. And I think if you keep telling abuse victims that what their worth is, and it's always positive worth, right, that hopefully that will help change their mindset.
All right, so we've been discussing domestic violence today. Now, if you're at home and you're looking for help, we're going to put up the numbers up right after this. But just remember, you can walk away and that there is hope. And we're here to support our sisters. So thank you for watching. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to Independent Chick on Shaw TV. I'm Dana Foster, and we are now joined with the current Miss Manito. Thanks so much for joining us. Maybe you can take a moment to introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Kanisha Tusis, and I'm 15 years old. I come from Palmaker Treaty 6 First Nations in Saskatchewan, and I'm currently going into grade 10 this year, and I'm looking forward to it, as well as looking forward to representing Miss Manito powwow by being their traveling princess.
What made you decide to go into this it's not actually called a pageant, is it? What is it? It's called a...
It could be considered a princess pageant,
okay.
Yeah.
What made you decide to enter into this?
Well, I have goals of becoming Miss Indian world someday, and that's one of my
Awesome.
dreams as well. And it's also something I like to do, to be a representative for their family. It's an important thing to be a representative for their family.
What sort of things would you want them to look up to you for?
Well, I'd like to acknowledge that there are many women and young ladies who are already making good lives for themselves, and they're doing such good things, wonderful things for themselves, and they're representing themselves as Native women in a very good way, and I'd like to acknowledge them for that. But I know there's many young women who are also lost, losing our ways, or they're unaware of the respect for themselves. And that's what I would like, a very important message that I'd like to share with young women, is to help them find the respect for themselves, to know that they're sacred, and to know that they're holy, and to find respect for themselves. And once they find respect in themselves, that they'll be able to do whatever they want, whatever they can achieve, whatever they believe, any of their dreams, they can go for it, because they respect themselves and they know that they're beautiful, young, smart women.
Who taught you that for you?
Well, I've grown up. I'm very thankful for my upbringing, and my mother, Celeste Tusis. She's my inspiration, and she's my teacher, and she's passed so many kind things on to me, and she's brought so many opportunities into my life. I've taken different training, and I've gone through a lot of healing, for myself, and I'd like to share that healing with young women, because I know that young women go through that. It's very realistic.
What sort of healing messages would you share to a young girl that might be going through some sort of tragic or hard time right now?
Well, it's to acknowledge that the longer you keep a secret down, the longer you keep it underneath, the longer you keep it under and you cover it, the longest time, if you think someone's going to get mad at you, or if you think someone's going to get mad at you for telling on them, it's only going to create worse things for yourself, because the longer you keep negative energy inside of you, it'll give you sickness.
So you want to encourage women to speak out on anything that's being done to them in a negative way. What sort of advice can you give to them about coming out and not keeping anything a secret?
Well, there's healing you can do on yourself, first of all. It's all about acknowledging that you want to do better for yourself, because as soon as you know that you can create problems for yourself through sickness, and the moment that you want to heal yourself from that, it's the first step to getting past that and getting rid of it, and getting rid of that negative energy, and getting rid of that sadness, that hurt, anything, that moment is when you want to heal yourself for yourself. That's when it starts, and I'd like to say that when you find the moment when you want to tell someone about it, make sure that you absolutely trust them. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Life Skills, because that's where I first brought up my issue, and it was all because of a lady who came in and shared in our group. And it's a totally confidential group, so I'm not going to say her name. But she shared her story, and she had gone through the same same situation as I had. And I just felt that moment. I can tell her because she knows what I went through. And it was then that I just had this itch in myself that I got to tell her. I got to tell her, because she knows what's happening, because she'd healed herself. And that's when I started, and that was a huge step for me because I'd never told anybody. Nobody knew at all, and it had you could say it scarred me, and it made me block things from my life that I shouldn't have. It made me think less of myself in every way when I kept that with me. But as soon as I let it out, I knew that I was okay.
Strong, brave woman. You can see why you're Miss Manito, Ahbee. This show is all about independence, and what is your definition of an independent chick? You exude it, by the way, just so you know. But what is your definition of someone who's an independent chick?
Independence. Let me see. When she can get up every day and with a smile on her face and know that she's happy, know that she's fully sacred, and to respect herself and to go and reach for her dreams because she knows she can.
All right. And how do you feel about independence yourself? Do you feel like you're an independent chick?
Well, I know that I'm growing, and I know that I've grown a lot these past years, and I'm hoping to be able to make better decisions for myself, to better role model myself for other young women. And yes.
I work with a lot of young girls as well, so I know sometimes that there's a little fights that happen amongst girls. What sort of advice can you give to young girls if they're going through some sort of situation rather than fighting? What advice would you give?
Walk away from it, because you don't need that anger. You don't need that
bullying.
Yes, you don't need it. And if anyone ever tries to come up to you, confront you that way, just walk away from it, because that's theirs. That's their anger. That's their hate. That's their dislike. And you don't need that kind of energy if you want to be a wonderful young lady, and if you want to make better for yourself, just walk away from it.
All right. Well, you are a wonderful young lady. Thank you so much for joining us here on Independent Chick. You are watching Independent Chick, and I'm Dana Foster. Today we're talking about domestic violence. We are now speaking with Shamin Brown, who is the author of I'm an Addict in Bits and Pieces, One Woman's Journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Sure. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. In addition to that, I had several addictions issues from the time I was around 15, we'll say, until later on in life. And in the process of my addiction, I was engaged in abusive relationships and a lot of other things, lost my kids to care, regained them. So the book itself is as a snapshot of different areas of my life and recovery, and what those different things, how those different things contributed to my life as a whole. And towards the end, there's a self-reflection piece for each chapter, each snapshot, so that individuals who are going through what I went through can find a common ground, even if they're not ready per se to go to like counseling or something formal, and can start doing some of that introspective work, some of that looking at themselves and kind of figuring out, you know, how they feel about what they've been through, and where the root of some of the shame and other emotional issues that they're dealing with today.
There's almost a battlefield in the mind of women that are going through domestic violence. Do you think that, I think the biggest misconception or the comment that most people make is just leave. How would you like to educate people that are confused? I was one of those people.
Right.
Because I was in radio, and so I would do a lot of interviews about domestic violence, and I would just think, just leave. I didn't understand about the cycle of abuse. But.
Right. Well, and you often hear too that if you respected yourself, you wouldn't be in this position, and you know, plethora of other things. The typical woman leaves a relationship, an abusive relationship, at least 7 times before she leaves for good, and I think that there's a good reason for that. I mean, when you think about the fact that in that relationship you're exposed to shame, you're not loving yourself, you're dealing with trauma, you're coping in negative ways. Maybe if you have children, you're experiencing rage towards the children. you may be dealing with addictions, different things like that, and there's this underlying thought all the time that what happens if you leave? Because at least when you're in that, even though it's really uncomfortable and there's a lot of trauma, it's a negative experience, it's one that is predictable. It's one that, you know, you have some semblance of control over because you know what to expect. Whereas if you're on your own, you've been isolated from your social group, you've been, you know, you have all these coping issues. What does that look like? Will you lose your kids? Will you have anybody to rely on? Will you be able to financially look after yourself? And then of course you're dealing with your own self-hatred because you've taken these messages from the abuser that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you need to be better, you need to do things differently, and you've owned that. And so you're leaving this relationship and you're still going to have all of that stuff that's going to hold you back from really being your full you.
What is that last block that stops a woman from going through the door to leave?
Fear. Fear and shame, for sure. Yeah, and like I tend to think that secrets keep you sick. So depending on the degree of isolation that you're in as well, if you don't keep secrets and you have some supportive people that you can kind of say this is what's going on and check in with them, that opens that door that much wider, because you have someone to lean on when you come out of it. But if you have nobody, or if you have people that you're sharing that with and they're coming back at you with that blame the victim mentality, you're going to stay where you are a little bit longer until you have that support system.
I've traveled and I've had a lot of women share their stories with me. One topic was the family situation, so outside family members not wanting the victim to talk about the issue because that could lead to shame to their families. Do you find that that's an issue as well with what you?
It's funny actually, because in my book I talk about some of my using activity, and there was concerns because I am a mother about how would that impact my children. I guess my saving grace is that I've always been very open with my children from the beginning, so it's not going to be like the big dark secret that's now out in the open. But contacting my mom and saying, you know, what do I do? Like, you know, I'm not sure about this now. I've dreamt about it for so many years, but I'm afraid. And she had said, you know, reading that book makes her look like a terrible, terrible person as a mom. But it's not about us as individuals. It's about the greater good and who can you help? Right? Who, with our story, can we open a door for or set free? So I think that, you know, definitely there are some family members who are going to want to hide that. In my most recent relationship, it was years of, why don't you forget who you were? Why don't you be someone different? Don't talk about that. Don't share that. And that, of course, added to my sense of not being good enough, you know, my sense of being flawed or being broken because of the experiences that I've had, when in truth, when you allow yourself to be open and to experience healing and recovery, it actually adds more colors to the palette of who you are.
Now the other side, and I've talked to some men about this as well, that there are men that are going through abusive relationship. It's not as common, but have you experienced that men that have gone through abuse, who have been abused? I think a lot of men that are abusers have often been abused in childhood.
Definitely.
Experiences.
Definitely. I think that, you know, women and men who are abusers or who are abused are coming from a place where, you know, oftentimes they haven't had very strong messages about who they are as people, right? I think that for a man who's being abused, it's hard for me to speak to that because I don't have a very wide experience with that. However, the few that I have met, it's come down to the same as it has with women, having a lack of confidence, having a lack of self-worth, you know, being in a situation where, because you are not in a place where you've been allowed to believe in yourself because of whatever flaws that are there that other people haven't accepted, you then allow your self-worth to be defined by somebody else. And that somebody else, because of how you're already feeling about yourself, may be someone who needs to keep you down in order to feel good about themselves.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to seeing your book, and it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Dana Foster, and you are watching Independent Chick. Now, we're going to have some resources come up right after this. If you're in an abusive relationship and you're ready to walk away, there will be some numbers that you can call.